with ET Now. This is the India Development Debate, the only show on news television that puts the spotlight on development issues. I'm Sandeep Gurumurthi joining you from the news centre in Mumbai. Joining me in Delhi is my colleague and co-anchor Supriya Shrinate. Straight to the big debate tonight then. Union Minister Nitin Gadkari's self-goal in the weak job market has triggered a fresh political slugfest. The government is in damage control mode after Gadkari's foot-in-mouth comment on Sunday that there are hardly any new jobs, let alone reservation for the Marathas. The opposition parties have latched on to Gadkari's admission, the NDA government's failure to create jobs, saying that the former BJP president has called the Prime Minister's bluff on creation of over 1 crore jobs in the past 1 year.
Indeed, the political dogfight apart, the fact remains that new jobs are hard to come by. And even when it comes to the organised sector, the picture is even more grim, with just about 7 million new jobs being added in the past 1 year. Gadkari may be blaming it all on the advent of technology in banks and the government's fiscal constraints, but that's hardly any excuse. On a special edition of the India Development Debate, we put the test of Modi government's track record on job creation or the lack of it to get a real picture. All right, we've got a very special panel of experts and political commentators joining us right here on ET Now to discuss the big jobs debate. Gurucharan Das, author and commentator and former CEO of PNG India, Himanshu, professor at JNU, R. Jagannathan, editorial director for Rajya magazine, Shaina NC, spokesperson of the BJP, and Sanjay Jha representing the Congress party here. Thanks very much each one of you for being with us. And Jaggi, it's only fair that I begin with you because the BJP came to power promising to create 2 crore jobs every year. After 4 years, you've got one of the top leaders, somebody who's in the know-how, is in the decision-making capacity, Nitin Gadkari. And in some ways, he set the cat among the pigeons when he said, reservation all right, but where are the jobs? That's the sum and substance of what he said. Was this a candid admission of failure to create enough jobs in the last 4 years?
I think governments are enablers. And to the extent that the government keeps enabling the economy to create jobs, any government can create jobs. Let's also see the 3 fundamental factors have changed between say 15 years ago and now. One thing is automation is picking up across industries, not just manufacturing but also in services. You've seen that even in IT sector. Second thing is the economy's job creating potential in general has delinked from growth. I mean, earlier for every 1% growth in GDP, you could have 0.4% growth in jobs. Now it has halved. So which means that the fundamental job creating sector is down. Third thing is the sectors that actually create jobs are not booming in the private sector part of it. I mean, construction, real estate, these are all seriously down because of the fact that you had GST and demonetization and the general slowdown that's happened in the last 18 months, which is only now reversing. So the key job creating sectors actually are down and out and only now beginning to pick up. So I think these 3 factors have impacted job creation, but I think we should see some revival as we go ahead towards the election, but it will not be enough to take care of the thing. One more point, I don't think 15 million people are entering the job market. 15 million people may be coming into the working age group, but the actual labor force participation rate in India is less than 50%. So you need to create about somewhere between 8 to 9 million jobs, but you're probably creating 7 million. So you're probably 2 million jobs short. That's probably the numbers that are more real.
Okay, Jaggi says it's not as big a problem as it's made out to be. We are probably 2 million short and there are various factors at play and we must not disregard them. That's the opening comment from Jaggi. Let me take it straight to you, Shaina, before I take it to Gurucharan Das and the other experts on the panel. First, it was Vasundhara Raje and now Nitin Gadkari, 2 important BJP voices accepting, no jobs. Coming close to elections, are sections of the government now finally acknowledging that India is indeed facing a job crisis? One would argue that there are things that are under your control, things that are not under control, but the fact is that you can't be in denial about the job crisis or the job creation crisis. And with things like Air India, with artificial intelligence and IT in banks coming in, that's being blamed for no job. But the fact is that we have a job creation crisis.
Firstly, I would appeal to you and your viewers not to mislead each other with Nitin Gadkari ji's comment, because he is a very senior leader, and what his reference to context is must be known to all. When he talks about the Maratha agitation and the demand of the Maratha community that there should be reservation when it comes to government jobs and when it comes to educational institutes, that's where he says that in the government sector there are only so many jobs. So how can we create more jobs within the government employees, etc., or people seeking jobs? That is the area of contention. Now we all know that in a country as large as India, where you have skilled labor and you have unskilled labor, a lot of unskilled labor does not even come under the gamut of your database that you have provided. If to say 15 million Indians join the labor force every year, of which only 6.6 million are skilled, qualified, etc., then what does it make for the 8.4 million who may be skilled as carpenters, as laborers, as plumbers, as electricians, and so many other areas where you do not actually account for that in your traditional database. So I would only want to say, for those who are trying to make this into some kind of controversy, do understand the Maratha agitation is completely different. We know in a state like Maharashtra, 52% reservation has already been given to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, nomadic tribes, Vamukti Jati, and that is another segment that the Marathas want 16% and the Muslim subcaste want 5%. This is a debate which is completely independent of your debate today, which is to suggest that where are the jobs. Now, yes, go ahead.
No, Shaina NC, you've put the context all right, and I think you've done the job of differentiating what he really want to say, set the context, which was about Maratha reservation, but he's not the first. I mean, Vasundhara Raja said lynching is happening because there are not enough jobs, perhaps. Nitin Gadkari says, you want reservations, you may get reservations, but where are the jobs? So just to set the context right, you're right in saying he was talking in context of the Maratha agitation, but this is what he went on to say. Your point well noted about the informal sector job addition, and I'll come to that because we've got a separate section where we're going to talk specific jobs being generated there that are not being talked about. But let me take this across to Gurucharan Das. And Gurucharan Das, you know, the truth has to lie somewhere in between. It can't be a situation where there are no jobs in India, and it can't be a situation where every Indian is getting a job if he's coming into the job market. So is where are the jobs a valid question to ask a year ahead of general elections 2019?
Well, the first problem, of course, in discussing jobs in India is that we still don't have good labor statistics. Fortunately, now a few months ago, we did begin that process, and the results will come and we will know. But today, this fight between the BJP and Congress on how many jobs are being created is a chimeral fight, because we just don't know. The labor statistics that we have are either very old or they are terrible. The other thing I think we must recognize is that India's problem is not unemployment. Our problem is underemployment. It's the kind of jobs. So, and those kinds of jobs only come when the economy is growing at 8% to 10%. And so far, it has not been growing. So, it is correct to say that those that Achhe Din that Mr. Modi promised have not come. But nevertheless, the reality is that the government has made an effort, and a number of things have been done to enable a growth rate which will go from 8-9%. The bankruptcy law, GST, the FDI limits have been changed, the ease of doing business has improved, and there's more formalizing of the economy.
Okay.
But really, I think the failure of our biggest failure is that the Achhe Din type of jobs require an export push that has not been there in the last 4 years.
Okay, I take that point.
I think we have really, I mean, the reality is that the global exports are 16 to 17 trillion dollars. and India's share is only 1.7%.
Okay, and we haven't done enough to push that. Gurucharan Das, I take that point. I take that point, Mr. Das. Allow me to interrupt you and get in a quick word from Dr. Himanshu as well on one of the points that you made, Mr. Gurucharan Das, which is on underemployment versus unemployment. Mr. Das, if you can hear me, allow me to interrupt you there and let me get Himanshu's reaction on the point. Himanshu, do you agree with Mr. Gurucharan Das when he says that the problem is not unemployment as it is underemployment? Let's look at some statistics. As many as 18.3 million Indians were unemployed in 2017, and this unemployment is projected to increase to 18.9 million by 2019 according to the ILO. And still the government says it's not the jobs but the data and jobs that we are lacking, which is a fair point. We don't have a credible metric to measure the jobs that are being created. But which side of the debate are you in? Is the problem unemployment? Is the problem underemployment? And do you believe the government is in denial?
Let me put things in perspective. The first point that needs to be put out here is that there is certainly data on jobs that is available. It was there, and the same data that was used by the BJP when it claimed that it is going to create 2 crore jobs or there is a jobless growth during the UPA period, the same data was stopped. And I am emphasizing here that a government which came on the promise of creating 2 crore jobs every year should have been more proactive in creating those kind of databases. We had it between 2004 to 2011-12. In just the 7 years, we had 6 surveys on employment and unemployment. Why did the government did not try to have any survey on the employment and unemployment? It had surveys on sanitation, it had survey on Jan Dhan Yojana, it tried everything, but not a single survey on employment and unemployment. It woke up quite late to start a survey on employment and unemployment. That's for the NSSO surveys. But even for the Labour Bureau surveys, which were continuing, and they continued till 2016, which showed that the government first year of the government, actually number of jobs created in the overall economy declined by 16 million, and that is where the sixth round of the labour survey, which is the annual survey, not the quarterly survey, the annual survey, was actually discontinued. So I think there is also a kind of a dishonesty when you say that the data is not there, because the creation of data is also the responsibility of the government on such a particular issue, which is basically becoming a political issue. It's not just an academic matter. But let me come back to the issue that was being talked about. Professor, give me 2 minutes to just point out to 2 things. If you can give me 2 minutes to just tell you.
Okay, Professor
about,
Himanshu, if you can wrap up your first.
The first thing about
if you can wrap up your opening comments quickly.
No, I just wanted to say that the problem is much more serious than what is being projected. The issue is that there are actually roughly around 19 to 20 million people who are actually entering the job market. Not just the population, but also roughly 5 to 7 million people who are exiting agriculture. They need to be provided jobs in the non-agricultural sector, and one can't simply ignore those guys who are moving out for a better opportunity in the non-agricultural sector. And unemployment is not a metric, because in this country where poverty level is so high, remaining unemployed is a luxury that many poor people cannot afford. How many poor people can afford not to be working when they have to basically earn every day to feed their stomach? So I think it's not the question of unemployment, it's a question which is far more serious, and the data that comes out on wages, that the wages have declined in the last 4 years, makes it much more serious than the issue only of employment. It's a question which is far more serious, issues related to poverty, livelihood, starvation deaths, and all of these are linked. So I don't think one can simply wish away with the problem and say that there is no data and therefore the issue doesn't exist.
Right. Okay, fair point indeed. One can't wish away the problem and just blame it all on data. But I'll take this across to Sanjay Jha. And Sanjay, I know you wanted to come in earlier, but the question really is, it didn't obviously take too long for the issue to get politicized. I mean, once that Nitin Gadkari soundbite was out, it took your party president and many in the Congress and your sympathizers to ask, this is exactly what everybody wants to know. Where are the jobs? Was one of the top trending Twitter hashtags. The reality is that the jobs debate is perhaps getting hijacked not just by politics but also by this whole data debate. And there are no solutions being put on the table even by the principal opposition. You're not saying how do you create more jobs. All that you're saying is where are the jobs? And this could well have been a question that could have been asked of any political party. Don't you agree that the nature of the economy, and as someone who lives in Mumbai, has a huge exposure to how things happen, the nature of the economy is also perhaps changing, where the job creation will be different. And we're just perhaps getting obsessed with data here. Sanjay.
Supriya, let me start my response on a lighter vein. At least there are 3 jobs going right now on the ABP News TV channel. But let me now answer you with all the gravitas this serious problem deserves. I believe the job crisis is a critical issue to discuss, simply because it is a known reality that if the youth of a country are going to be unemployed, there is a very huge negative social cost in terms of what happens when the youth can get waylaid because they have no real direction and they can be exploited by many, social nefarious wicked people for ulterior motives. So I think this is something that we must always factor in. It is an economic crisis, but it also has social repercussions. Point number 2, when Mr. Modi says, I will create 2 crore jobs prior to the elections, Supriya, it's very relevant that we take these statements seriously. Because at that point when he promised 200 lakh jobs, he was basing it on what? On the available data at that point of time, on whatever were the surveys indicating. So to now suddenly try and change the game or the yardstick now to try and say that I have managed to reach at least some percentage of it will be rather disingenuous. You can't have one yardstick to compare the UPA and a different yardstick to compare the NDA. They have to be compared on the same platform. Point number 3, very fundamental. It is a known reality that if private capital investment grows, jobs will grow. Basically, if the GDP grows at a good rate, jobs should actually on a commensurate level should rise. This raises 2 critical questions, that the GDP was raised artificially, and therefore I keep maintaining this point, and the Congress party has been hammering it down from the very beginning. You raise the GDP completely by changing the formula, but the fundamentals of the ground did not change. Okay. That is one of the principal reasons why there is a complete disconnect between a government that shouts from the rooftops and the job crisis that is getting from bad to worse. My last point. Take quickly. The CMIE data. It's a very independent research body. My last point. The CMIE data, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, for 2018 tells you that India in 2018 moved for an unemployment rate of 4% in quarter 1 to 6.3 in quarter 3. I mean, this is hard data. Their survey size is bigger than NSSO.
I take that point, Sanjay.
Whichever EPFO data they can take, I can tell you we've already challenged them. I can
Sanjay, I take that point, and
I think we have a problem in jobs.
I take that point, which is what we're debating, Sanjay, and I'm glad you made the point on private capital formation. And part of the reason why there has been no private capital formation is because of the banking crisis, and the reason we are having this banking crisis is because of the way loans were given out in the NPA regime, in the UPA regime, is what many people would say. But since you pointed me to the CMI data, let me also bring that in and bring Jaggi into the discussion. Jaggi, according to the CMI data, labour market was strained in Q1 of the present fiscal. Employment rate is 40.4 versus 41.9 a year back. Labour participation rate is 42.7 versus 43.6 a year back, and unemployment has climbed to 5.5 versus 4 a year back. So on all key metrics, it's deteriorated. However, this is in contrast to the high frequency data that we are picking up and that people, economists like you analyze, which is showing a strong uptick in the economy, at least in certain sectors. What explains the divergence between economic activity like rising capacity utilization and evidence of which we're seeing in hard data, and the job scenario which continues to remain bleak?
Well, three, four things. First thing is, when you look at the CMIE data, it is gathered over a period of time. Whereas if you actually look at how employment data must be captured, it should all be done on the same day. Like the US employment data, payrolls data is all taken on one day, so that nobody has moved. If you take the CMIE data, it moves over 4-month period, which means a guy who doesn't have a job on the first day of the survey may have a job by the end, but it does not capture that. It may capture a job loss. So it's not, you need to use that data with caution. Second reason why I think the CMI may be an underestimate, let's not forget one thing. In the 2011 census, which is actually the gold standard on jobs, because they have gone to every single household and thing, there are 362 million full-time workers and 120 million part-time workers. So there is no way 482 million people who had jobs suddenly shrank to 400 million in the CMI survey. So there is some dissonance in terms of how the jobs are counted. The second point is, I think you talked about what is the data that is showing that investment is picking up and various things, but it is not reflecting in the jobs data. I think it will reflect after a lag, but there is also the point which I mentioned earlier. You see, every additional output is actually being also enhanced by capital. So today people do not necessarily increase labor component of manufacturing or services when they can actually add a certain amount of capital, or capital raises productivity, automation, all those things. So you are not going to get the kind of jobs bounce even if, say, demand growth increases all that fast. That's been actually the case in the US. If you see, between 2001 and now, there has been no growth whatsoever in the median income of the people, nor have there been too many extra jobs. In fact, there are problems there, and the reason is, every time there is a recession, actually it takes a longer time for the economy to come back to its old level of jobs. This is because automation is providing the productivity growth and not labor addition. That trend is happening in India too, and you will see that. In fact, I am writing a book on that, and I think I know a lot of detail on that.
Okay. Let me bring Himanshu in as well. Himanshu, Jaggi made this point in his first question, which is the reset in the economy that we are seeing with GST and reforms like that, and some sectors which are sort of job creating sectors like real estate, etc. have seen some amount of erosion. So is in some sense, is erosion of jobs a price being paid for the reset of the Indian economy, the sort of quote unquote clean up in the Indian economy through reforms like GST or the bankruptcy code, etc., which are sort of long term structural bets?
No, you're right about this. And in fact, if you look at the Jaggi was right in also pointing out that the GST and the demonetization had an impact, and there's no point denying it that the economy was reset, and it had an impact not just on the rural economy but also on the informal economy in general, but also it has a spillover effect on the overall economy. I think the point that is what we are missing in this particular debate is there is actually a severe crisis in the rural areas, and that's where bulk of the employed workers are. And we are talking about rural areas where the crisis is not just in agriculture, non-agricultural sector, rural construction has more or less collapsed. Wages have been declining now almost for 4 years. And these are indicators where just by creating jobs in some sectors, banking sectors and other sectors, you're not going to deal with the problem. We are dealing with a problem which is far bigger than what is being projected here. All the sectors that we're talking about, export sector or even the high-tech sectors and other sectors that we're talking about, they will not be able to absorb the number of people who are moving out or coming into the job market every year. And that will basically mean that you have to basically revive the rural economy. The demand in the rural economy has to be revived for employment to be created. This is how it was created earlier. In fact, the non-agricultural economy in the rural areas was creating roughly around 7 million jobs per year, even in the UPA period when we were claiming that the UPA was not creating enough jobs. But that itself has come down, at least the data that is available by the Labour Bureau surveys. So I think unless we reset the economy, these incremental measures of skill building, some sector, and some other sector is not going to help you deal with the massive challenge. And the Maratha agitation is a good pointer. It's not just the Maratha agitation. It's also the Jats, it's the Patels. These are all rural workers. In the sense, most of them had their livelihood in agriculture. But agriculture under collapse has basically forced them to seek out jobs elsewhere. And that's something which has to be understood, something that has to be taken into account when we are talking about jobs. We are planning for jobs in the economy.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. You've just hit it bang on. I mean, you're 5 to 7 million people quitting agriculture as their professional mainstay. They need to be accommodated in the formal or the informal job market. But Gurucharan Das, before I go back to the politicians, I do want to ask you this question. Mr. Gadkari also in his statement did say that there's a freeze on recruitments on the government's point or the government side. The reality is, when it comes to investments, the government has very consciously decided to let the public sector be the engine of investment because the private sector is not investing. Shouldn't the same logic also apply to job generation, to the job market, that the government needs to recruit many more people because private enterprises are not going to do that right away?
No, I'm afraid I disagree. Well, there are vacant government jobs. There was a report a few days ago that there are a very large number of vacant government jobs and they should be filled. But government should not be creating jobs. In fact, I would say that this banking crisis that we have been through was a very, very real opportunity to privatize some of the bad banks. And we've got to understand that government's job is to govern and not to do business. The government can enable the creation of jobs by making an environment which is good for investment, but investment should be done by private individuals. And the fact of the matter is that there are opportunities for example, one of the best programs that the government has got is the program called Housing for All by the year 2020.
Right. Okay, I think we've kind of lost that link with Gurucharan Das, and we'll just go back to him in a minute from now as soon as that link is fixed. But I'll take it across to Shaina NC. And Shaina, since you represent the ruling benches here, and Mr. Gurucharan Das fleetingly referred to vacant jobs, you know, we're talking about this huge job crisis. There is such a lack of jobs, and yet there are 23 lakh vacant positions both at the center and the state level. And this is not data that's coming in from anywhere. This is data that's coming in from Rajya Sabha question and answers. It pertains to between Feb and July 2018. That does suggest that 23 lakh vacant positions, and you know, job opportunities to the tune of 10.4 lakh in education sector, 5.4 lakh in police, 2.5 lakh jobs nearly in railways. Now, you know, I may agree with Gurucharan Das that the government doesn't need to be in the business of creating jobs, but won't filling these existing vacant positions itself help mitigate through some of the crisis?
I agree with you. I think that we should initiate a process that every job is occupied at the earliest, but let's understand 2-3 points. One, that the central government has about 33 lakh jobs which are created or open for contenders, and the state governments have approximately 1.67 crores. Now, this constant heading that you are flashing on your channel, which shows Nitin Gadkari saying where are the jobs, that has to be put in a reference to context. If you're asking for reservation for particular communities and for them to avail of these jobs, obviously it has to be fitted in within what is available. But if we're talking about the larger story, which is jobs for India at large, you take for example the labor force, you see that there has been a decline in employment there. But what is the reason and the logic? Look at the kind of automation and the use of technology. So that obviously offsets some part of the people who would be given these kind of jobs in the past. You take the skilled versus unskilled. Now you have skilled labor, which is obviously X amount, the unskilled labor whose database is not even really recorded. You have today's service industry, which is based on vocational training, whether it's gardeners, plumbers, electricians, etc., car mechanics, drivers. You cannot always have a recorded database of all. And you must understand, you talk about the agricultural sector, look at the use of technology that our Prime Minister and our government has promoted. So if you have schemes of if you have solar pumps, for example, you have better cash crops, use of technology to figure out what the soil should be. You are using less labor and more of technology and more of the best available information. So I think that we need to look at this holistically. Let's not confuse reservation with jobs, because the Maratha reservation, where their demand was for government jobs and educational institutes, obviously has to be confined to what is available, which is what Mr. Nitin Gadkari has said. That is not for 1 minute suggesting that if there are here large infrastructure projects or huge investments made of industry, jobs will not be created.
Okay,
we are working towards that, but we are also working towards the new age young entrepreneur who works out of home, who sets up a startup and who is not falling under your roll call of who is employed and who is not.
I take that point. I take that point, Shaina, and that's a fair.
Sound very fudgy, but I think it's more important to see what the reality on ground is.
Okay, I take that point, Shaina. Shaina, allow me to interrupt you.
Lakhs and crores of youngsters
Okay.
work out of their homes.
Sure,
and
sure.
earn
I take that
probably
point,
much
Shaina,
more.
and see, allow me to interrupt you. I take that point, and that's my question to you, Sanjay. I know you wanted to respond to what Shaina says, but allow me to slip in a question there. Close to 80% of India's total workforce of 470 odd million work in the informal sector. We're not counting self-employed. Uber drivers, Swiggy delivery executives, Flipkart delivery executives. We don't count these when we tabulate job creation. Ola, Uber employ nearly 10 lakh drivers, and some of them make as much money as a starting engineer would. So it's also important to take note of the changing nature of the Indian economy. When we are having a debate on jobs, because they don't get captured in the formal workforce.
That's a very relevant question, Sandeep. India is increasingly becoming a gig economy. But remember, because we don't have a social security safety net, which is something that we can be proud of, end of day, it stresses the job market even further. And I want to make a point here really. I completely disagree, and I would like to make this point with what Mr. Das mentioned. India is not America. We are not UK. We still have 20% people below the poverty line. As you rightly mentioned yourself, Sandeep, there are millions in the informal sector whose joblessness never gets captured. To say that private capital will ensure that problem will be sorted out, I think is being highly convenient with the truth. End of day, capital and public spending by any government, even the US government, by the way, is spending on infrastructure to create jobs, and we are talking about the American economy. So I completely feel that's an irrational economic thought. But a couple of trends on jobs that we cannot ignore. No rhetoric, I'll give you facts. If you find reverse migration happening from urban areas to rural areas and the demand for Manrega going up, both jobs and wages, it tells you that the job crisis is for real. If we're going to ignore that, I think we are really, kind of missing the woods for the trees. Point number two, and this is not anecdotal. Every state has had PhDs, MBAs, qualified engineers, scientists, commerce graduates applying for the jobs of PNs and constables. I'm not trying to diminish the quality of the PN and constable's job, but I'm saying if overqualified people have to apply for jobs that do not demand that as a minimum qualification, that is a manifestation of a very serious job crisis that if a government ignores it, whether it's a Congress or the BJP or a third government, I think is calamitous. My third point will be, I think politicians need to speak with a lot more responsibility. To treat it like, pakoda economics, pan economics, doodh economics, I think you actually trivialize a very, very serious problem. And I keep coming back to that. This government talks about EPFO data, etc. I can tell you why that is flawed. Because if you go by this government's data that they created 7 million jobs, what they're trying to tell you is
Sanjay,
that since independence, India has
right.
created only 90 million jobs, which I think is patently ridiculous. So I think if you can't accept the problem, how can you solve it?
Sanjay. Okay, Sanjay, you raise a valid point there. This is not a debate that can reduce itself to just pan and pakodas. But Gurucharan Das, we lost that line with you. I do want to come to you. The point that's being made is that politicians don't see merit in more private capital. The reality is that they want government to be in businesses, not just it has no business to be in, but in businesses otherwise. That's the comfort level that politicians seem to have. Do you agree with this?
You addressing it to me? Sorry, I didn't understand.
That's right, sir. Go ahead.
Are you addressing this question to me?
That's right, sir. This question is for you. Yes. Yes, Mr. Gurucharan Das, that question is for you. The point that was being made when we lost you really was that politicians don't see merit in more private capital.
Exactly. I think I agree with you. I think that yes, the government can play a very important role. And when Mr. Modi talked about Vikas and Achhe Din, he was actually speaking about a legitimate role that a government can play in creating an enabling environment for jobs. And there are still, I mean, government, for example, in as Mr. Jha pointed out, the government can play a very important role in infrastructure. We know, for example, the Golden Quadrilateral created masses of jobs. A wonderful study was done by the World Bank, which showed that in the 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers radius around the Golden Quadrilateral between 2002 and 2007, a great number of jobs were created. So I do think that the government, if you are single-minded, you can do it. I was just pointing out to you that what people want are not the kind of informal jobs. That's not Vikas. That's what they're used to. What they're looking for are formal jobs. And where we have failed there, and the government could have done more, they could have been much more single-mindedly focused on infrastructure, housing, and exports. Exports is really the saddest story of all when it comes, because that's how the Asian tigers really became rich, whether beginning with Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and now the latest story is China. These people created jobs through exports. And I think that sort of export pessimism, and it's not by giving subsidies that you create exports. You create exports by either like the Shenzhen model of China, or you create, there are still, I mean, there's a lot of pessimism that a lot of jobs are being lost because to automation. But the reality is you still have to, people have to wear clothes,
Supriya, can I make a point?
and all,
Quick
everything
one.
can't be automated.
Okay.
And we just need to increase our share
Good point.
in a very small way to
Okay.
become a major player
In the
and
export
solve
market.
the job problem as
Can I
well.
make a quick point?
Okay, I take the one. Sanjay, I'll come to you. I want to get a quick word from Himanshu on a point that China made on self-employment. Himanshu, India has 215 million self-employed people. They go sort of unnoticed, they're unregistered, EPF data perhaps doesn't capture them, but why are we missing them in the debate? They could earn up anywhere between 3 to 4 lakhs per annum. It's agreeable that these are vulnerable jobs, but why do we not count them as well? So in some sense, are we mixing the job crisis with sort of, this, like Manish Sabharwal keeps saying, the issue is not jobs, the issue is quality of jobs, gainful employment. That is what, frankly, the debate should be on. Would you agree with that, Himanshu?
No, I agree with that the issue is not just jobs, and that's why I started with that. Frankly, in this country there is nobody who is unemployed in that sense. Poor people simply cannot afford to be unemployed, so they do something. And the second myth that has been propagated for quite some time now is that we don't count these self-employed workers. Now all the surveys, whether it is of NSSO or it is for a labor bureau, all of them do count the self-employed workers. So all the pakoda walas, Uber walas, and everybody is counted in the universe of 472 million that you are talking about. So we do count them. But really the problem that is there is about aspirations, is people who are stuck in low paying, low productivity and really low working condition jobs. Those are the people who want to move out. In fact, large majority of the people who are self-employed are in agriculture or in other informal sectors where they are finding it difficult to make their ends meet. And those people cannot be simply provided jobs, because there is also a problem of transition. There is also a problem of demand. I mean, not everybody can be an entrepreneur when there is absolutely no demand. And the real problem that we are missing from is that the economy has suffered in the last 3 or 4 years, whether it was drought and there was various other things combined together. And when there is no demand that is coming from the economy, rural economy as well as the urban economy, then self-employment and telling them that you become an entrepreneur is basically making a joke out of them. So I think one has to be, and the government in that sense, and I must say this, and this is something which is not just the NDA government but also the previous governments, this statistics is very important, that the total number of government jobs actually have declined in the last 20 to 30 years. The big contributor to informalization and contractualization of government jobs has been all successive governments in the last 10 to 15 years or last 20, 25 years. Let me give you one example of it. The backbone of our social development programs, the midday meals, the ICDS programs, your health workers, which is the ASA workers, all of them get peanuts, 500 rupees to 1500 rupees. I mean, do you call them a regular jobs? When the government itself is violating all forms of decency in terms of creating regular jobs, then why do you expect the formal sector to be paying good quality and decent jobs and creating formal jobs? They are also going through a process of contractualization, and the level of contractualization in organized manufacturing in just the last 10 years has increased from less than 20% to more than 35%. So we are talking about a situation where informalization is being created rather than something that the government providing opportunities for people to move up.
Okay. Dr. Himanshu, just hold your thoughts there, because I want to go back to Jaggi. And Jaggi, do you agree with the CMI analysis of how jobs figures have been arrived at? The Prime Minister claimed 70 lakh jobs created in the organised sector. The CMI believes it's perhaps an addition of 45 lakh EPF addition between September 17 and May 18, 5.7 lakh addition to NPS in the same period, and the entire 50.7 has been extrapolated to 70 lakhs. Is that what has been done? Because if you actually look at the kind of figures that have been quoted, CAs, doctors, lawyers, the kind of jobs that they've all created, or the Mudra loan beneficiaries, it's all adding up to that number. So this is nothing but extrapolation of some data like EPF and NPS. Is it not at the end of the day? Jaggi.
Yeah, 2 points I'd like to make. One thing is, I think unless you have deduplicated data, which means every job is mapped to, say, let's say an Aadhaar number or whatever it is, and you're able to make sure that you don't count the same job twice, you're going to get this kind of discrepancy between what the CMI does and what the Prime Minister might claim at the gross level. So that thing, deduplication, needs to be taken seriously before we know the net new jobs created. Second thing, I want to make a broader point. I think we keep talking about 2.4 million jobs, vacancies that are not getting filled. I think both opposition and government may ask themselves a fundamental thing, and how both government and opposition are actually destroying jobs by what they are doing. Let me put it this way. You have given farm loan waivers of 1.5 lakh crores over the last 18 months, starting with UP last year, right? This has destroyed the fiscal space of every state. Why do you think states are keeping jobs open and vacant when they can happily before an election say, oh, we have created 100,000 jobs or whatever it is? They are not filling up vacancies because they do not have the fiscal space which has been created by giveaways like farm loan waivers. So if you have destroyed your fiscal space by doing all these kind of things, then how are you ever going to absorb all these things? So what they are doing is they are delaying projects. Infrastructure projects are getting delayed, and they are delaying filling up vacancies, because this is the only way they can stick to their fiscal maps, whether it is at the state level. So states are actually destroying jobs by doing this mindless things like endless farm waivers. State after state has been giving that, and that's where I think we need to really ask, if you're going to spend like this. And the Congress party, of course, has been drumming up the thing and forcing the government's hand to give more and more waivers. I mean, you're going to destroy more jobs. In fact, the CEA said last time that this farm loan waivers is going to bring down your GDP impact will be about 0.5 to 0.7% impact on GDP. So how will jobs grow if you're going to destroy it at the other end?
Okay, that's a fair point you're making, Shana, and see, I want you to respond to that point. And I'm also, another point picking up from what the Prime Minister made in the, in his reply to the no confidence debate in the Parliament. He did touch upon jobs, and he referred to the transport sector, which he says reportedly created 20 lakh jobs, and the basis of which was, new commercial vehicles provided a little over 11 lakh jobs, 25 lakh new passenger cars were sold, and so it extrapolated to say that, 5 lakh drivers and jobs were being created. Auto rickshaws provided a little under 3.5 lakh jobs. I mean, so this extrapolation is how the government arrived at this figure. But is job creation so simplistic? I mean, can we just extrapolate basis the number of cars sold and autos sold and bikes sold to say this many jobs are being created?
Look, what do we really need for job creation? We need huge, large infrastructure projects, which Minister Nitin Gadkari's department is probably doing the finest job ever. I mean, an agenda of touching 90 kilometers a day is unrealistic, but it creates not just labor, it gives opportunity to a lot of people. Yes, we want investment in certain industries, which we have seen being completely in the doldrums, be it real estate as an example, which also employs a lot of people, or for that matter, certain industries which create livelihood for unskilled labor, whether it is sorting of products at machinery, like for example in a jewelry line where you have so much of technology being used, where people used to earlier segregate by hand, and processes where people were using their actual skill of separation. This is stuff that we have to comply with and understand that with changing times there will be technology that takes over jobs, there will be automation that actually takes care of a lot of the work that the labor force would do. But if you only talk about the automobile industry and see the amount of jobs they have been able to give and the kind of growth, I'm sure that in the years to come we will be able to have a holistic, sustainable model. But our Prime Minister's focus on technology and first new entrepreneurs who work out of home, who have startups, who work out of their own computer and create a livelihood for themselves is something we need to encourage as well. So everything cannot be just recorded under a parameter of data. We have to understand that ours is a complicated country with many, many avenues to consider.
Okay. Fair point. Just hold that thought, Shana, because I have a question to ask of Sanjay Jha. And Sanjay, while I agree with some points that you make on the debate, where I want to question you on is who's going to create these new jobs? Traditionally it has been big businesses that have had big projects, big infrastructure issues, and they've created the new jobs. It now seems that the new job creation is a burden that will have to be shouldered by the MSMEs, because, I mean, look at where big business is. You constantly attack big business, and the question that I think some people will be royal to ask today is that where will this lead to job creation? Where is the confidence for big business to create jobs when they have been put on the mat politically?
Once again clarifying, but Supriya, once again clarifying the Congress party's official position. We are not against big business. We are not against industry. We are not against anybody. In fact, we are only against crony capitalists. So, in fact, some of the biggest conglomerates in India, some of the biggest business houses in India have grown during the time when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. I agree partially with what Gurcharan Das mentioned about exports being a critical part of job creation. But you got to remember that today exports as a percentage of the GDP under Mr. Modi's government is at a 14-year low. So yes, it does have an impact. But I disagree that you can only focus on exports, because end of day the Asian economies went bust because of the currency crisis. I mean, today, thanks to the tariff war between America and China, you can see the Chinese job market is going to be under huge stress. So tariff wars also make you very vulnerable if you are very export driven, dependent on jobs. So I'm glad that India is primarily dependent on domestic consumption and domestic capital. I think the fundamental problem here, Supriya, is this, that demonetization and GST, and I know we have talked about it till the cows come home, did disrupt the rural economy in some ways irreparably. It takes time. These are not economies that suddenly will, trigger bounce back. So you have a situation today where the bounce back is slower. And remember, the MSME is the largest employer. The largest companies in India, the largest manufacturing company in India are becoming capital intensive. We all know that. Today, tech companies are using artificial intelligence and drones and big data, and everybody is trimming jobs. It's a reality.
Okay, I take that point, Sanjay. Sanjay, I take that point. I'm completely running out of time. I'm sorry, I'll really have to interrupt you. I want to give Gurcharan Das the last word. Gurcharan Das, 45 seconds, but this is to pick up on a point that you made on this whole export push. Is it also time to accept that, you know, the reality, the new normal, job creation will be a factor of balance sheets, of corporate balance sheets, ability to invest. It will be a factor of the global economy. You know, if the world becomes increasingly insular, exports will take a hit. You know, we're talking of a trade war between US and China. Obviously, that will have an impact on exports, and that in turn will have an impact on jobs. So, to some extent, job creation is no longer going to be a function of just tall poll promises or counter political attacks. It is deep rooted in economic realities, and our political class is perhaps simply divorcing the two.
You know, sure, there is a trade war going on between the United States and China, but there are a lot of low-hanging fruit, and there are a lot of jobs that have left China and are going to Vietnam and Bangladesh. Why aren't they coming to India? I mean, there's a huge market. I mean, 1.7% of the global market is, for a country like India, is disgraceful. Even if we just took it up to 2.5%, your job problem would be solved. And so I personally think that we underestimate. We've always been export pessimistic, and we underestimate the ability of Indians to be able to create work. And this is this is what people are, the kinds of jobs that people want. You know, there's all the productive jobs, and so I just think I personally feel that we have been let down by the Ministry of Commerce.
Okay.
That if that one ministry could have done so much more in the last 4 years than it did.
Okay.
And it's been a failure for the last, you know, not now, but for the last 50 years.
Okay.
It was much worse before, but even now it's
I take that point, and probably someday on the India Development Debate we will do a review of the Ministry of Commerce and how they have performed, and hope to have you and Jaggi and Himanshu on that debate as well. Completely timed out then in this edition of the India Development Debate. Gurumurthi Das, R. Jagannathan, Himanshu, Sanjay Jha, and of course Shana NC. Really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us with your perspective on this very crucial jobs debate right here on ET Now.
Indeed, we put out a question on our Twitter poll which said, where are the jobs? Do you believe Modi government has failed to create enough jobs? The answer in itself is very telling, because most polls are very polarized. This one's very equitably divided. 52% are actually saying yes, and 48% are actually saying no. So the majority believes that the government has failed to create enough jobs. It's an emotive issue. It will definitely be an electoral issue as well. But on that note, completely timed out of this edition of the India Development Debate. Thank you very much for being with us. Coming up next is Top 10 at 10.